I was married at this church, and then we moved to a different part of the town, and so I didn't come here anymore. And I went to other churches, but somehow they were not fulfilling my need for church. And I had a period of time when I didn't go to church at all. And then one day, literally one morning on a Sunday, I woke up and I literally had this really strong feeling I wanted to go to church. And I wanted to come back to the church of my childhood. And it was an extraordinary feeling, actually, because when I walked through the doors, it was like putting a comfy old slipper on, because it was just everything I'd ever known, and it just felt right being here. And I've never lost that feeling. And as I've become more involved with St Eanswythe, one of the jobs I do here, I do the flowers here now with a colleague. And when I'm doing my flowers, I don't know why, but Eanswythe is very much part and parcel of being here with me. I just feel, because I like to feel that she is just in the building with me, and sometimes I'm here quite on my own sometimes too, and that's quite comforting to think that I'm not alone. She's here. She's tucked in there.
My role, my professional role, really, has been just to be amazed, really, to be astonished, to actually express that kind of astonishment and amazement. I came in to visit when the professional team were investigating and were looking at the bones. They were checking them out, and I was really astonished, first of all, at the professionalism of that team. You know, we had some really kind of outstanding professionals analysing and really taking care of those bones. What amazed me, though, was not just the actual relics themselves. What really amazed me was the effect that they were having on the members of the team. Now, as far as I'm aware, only one of that team had any particular Christian faith. The others weren't churchgoers. I'm just not sure, you know. And yet, somehow, they were being affected beyond the usual kind of professional parameters that they worked in. They all expressed to me at certain points the kind of the effect that this particular investigation was having on them in a different way to any other. Some sense of a presence, some sense of the sacred. And I was really fascinated and interested by that there was something special that was going on that couldn't be quantified scientifically, even though it was a scientific investigation and they were doing everything they could to do that as rigorously as possible. There was this kind of other dimension that was going on, and they were all kind of awed, really. And that was amazing to me.
It was still amazing to me as I started to handle the relics, to get them out in a very careful way, that the concept of what I might be handling, even though I had the gloves on, I was still very conscious. I'm holding here what may be the physical remains of you know, a princess of Kent, a daughter of King Eadbald of Kent, who's a granddaughter of King Ethelbert, the first English king to convert to Christianity. You know, this is a named individual from our nation's history and our town's history and so on. You know, and that was, you know, quite an experience. And I think there is something in this notion of physical objects, material objects, conveying something of their history to us in an emotional sense. You know, I wouldn't have gone into archaeology if I wasn't fired up by the notion of when you touch something, when you find something, that it's giving you some sort of connection to that past and to the human past. You know, so when you're digging and you dig something up and you're the first person to see it for thousands of years. That means something. I think a lot of archaeologists, if they're honest, that does speak to them, and it's part of the thing that drives their passion for being archaeologists. But I think actually many people, who are at all in touch with or interested in the past are driven particularly by touch. I think people, whenever we take archaeological finds on a road show or a travelling exhibition or something like that, and we give children but also adults the chance to actually handle objects as opposed to viewing them through the glass of a museum display case, they love it. And if you're on a dig and something's just been dug up, and people get the sense that they may be the first person to have held something for 2,000 years or 5,000 years, that really animates them. And why that is, why that matters to us as humans, that connection through that material object with a past that we're trying to imagine in our heads, is I think to do with fundamental aspects of the human imagination and the human spirit. And this, again, was a step above any of the things I've ever dealt with. And I've handled a lot of archaeology in my time. So, touch in the past does matter for some reason.
Well, it was, again, like no other. Well, I can't say like no other. I find myself in really peculiar places. I've been down under the River Thames when the trains were stopped, because that's the only time you could work on the train tracks, looking at arches. And I've been down in salt mines with graffiti. So I have often found myself in really bizarre places. And so at first thought when the idea was that we would stay overnight in the church and make sure she was safe. I thought that would be fun and different and I was really up for it. But once I was here, I was hit by the kind of serenity of it. And like right now, it's very bright in here. Most of the whole time it was very dark, fitting for the middle of winter, and it was cold and rainy outside. And there was a lot of hustle bustle in the other room with the bones laid out on the table. Once we got her out and had the reliquary on the table here, my focus was then more on the fine remains within the reliquary and trying to see if there's any micro details there. And also assessing the condition of the reliquary and looking at is this fungus or is this soot is a question that's still outstanding. I need to do more work on it. But I'm really pleased that we did it here it seemed right that we did it here rather than in a laboratory.
And we were in there talking and chewing things over and reading to each other and drinking coffee. And then you'd come in here where Ainsworth was kind of laid out. And again, it was and this is where we said the prayers in here, where we prayed in here. And then you'd go through that door and everyone was there, like Dana and Dana's assistant, Marie were there, and Andrew and people like that were all there in their white, police suits kind of thing, with their masks on and their microscopes. And then behind them is this big empty church, and you couldn't see the back of it because the lights were never on, and it was just this big dark space. And that's what it felt like. It felt like here we were on the edge in these little illuminated rooms of this mystery, this great dark mystery, and that we'd somehow brought Ainsworth out of the darkness into our space, because this was our space, and we'd somehow brought her temporarily in here with us, and she was like present. That's what it felt like.
There's the start of laying out as a skeleton in the vestry on the table, and that really brings it back to you, because yes, you can see the odd bones here and there, but when you start to see a skeleton, and the following day it's a complete skeleton, as much as there is there, but you see all the hands and the feet and the whatever, and you therefore get an idea of her height, which we knew she wasn't tall and so on. And yes, it brings it back when you to what you're looking at. Quite amazing.
I'm definitely very much interested in the science behind all of this and the kind of conservation aspect of all of this. But then, of course, on the kind of family history side, the faith side of things. But I remember, I have this very clear memory of when she was laid out on the table and we were kind of saying goodnight to her, if you like, before those that were staying in the church overnight settled down, and we made sure they had enough things to keep them warm and just before we left. And Leslie and I were talking sort of over the bones and commenting on the size of her hands and the fact that the bones, you could see that her hands were the same size as my own. And that, I don't know, it kind of struck me a little bit, thinking that she was a similar stature to myself, which, I don't know, just felt warm. I can't think of any other way to describe it. But it kind of made the reality of the story that I've been told and the story that I've read about my whole life was real, and that this person was a real person. They enacted real change and made a real difference to the people that were around in her time.
I think so. I think that a lot of artists are looking to be interesting, and actually really they haven't really got that much to say. And when I think about it, it's that sort of teenage angstiness in the arts, where it's, quite often very middle class people looking to sound interesting, and they haven't really got much to say, so they have to borrow from culture, and they have to, you see it with the occult, or you see it with Christianity and religion or sexuality. It's quite often heightened to the point where actually the mundane and just being part of a community, it may be slightly less exciting, but it's more authentic in so many ways. I think the desire to own culture and narrative is a real problem at the moment, rather than just participating. I think what's really interesting about this project is it was participatory, and it involved a broad range of the community.
Well, to start off, I am Ivor. I am 10 years old, and I go to school at St Eansworth Primary, just across the road. And I met the bones of St Eansworth in this very room when they were all laid out on a table just behind this camera. And it was actually very special because I'm the only child in St Eansworth history to meet the bones. So I think I'm a very lucky person to have this advantage. I mean, it was more intriguing than scary because I knew that she was never a bad person and she wouldn't come to be horrible to people. In a way, it did feel quite strange because I was standing in the presence of a true hero.
Well, I think probably because I come from a Roman Catholic heritage, we tend to talk about the sacramental, and that's, I mean, the Catechism says an outward sign of inward grace, but it's really the point in both services and also in life when we experience something beyond ourselves. People have talked during the COVID restrictions about re-engaging with nature during their daily walks and things like that. I believe that all humans have the ability and need to experience that sense of something bigger than themselves, and those are nourishing experiences for us, and those 3 days would qualify as that kind of experience of something that I certainly struggle to put into words, but I can still capture it, and I can talk to people who shared it, and we feel a sense of having a shared experience. How, even if we categorise it differently, I think there's a sort of confidence that what we felt as people was the same thing, really, whatever language we use to describe it.
I suppose the interesting thing is when you're out scrabbling about looking for things, It doesn't matter what it is. If you've lost a pen or something like that and you tidy up your room and you go looking for it, you always find other things that you weren't expecting. And I think a lot of us found that, and I think that's why quite an interesting community formed around this project. So for me, probably the most spectacular and most, really sort of struck me sideways was a phone call I got from Ellie Williams and Leslie in the background saying, "You've got to come down to the church, you've got to come down to the church." And I came down to the church and knocked on the vestry, and there was this kind of wonderful spine-tingling silence in the vestry room, and I came into the room, stood next to Bishop Rose, who I think has an amazing aura about her, and there was this sort of hushed silence of, "It's her." And there was Ainsworth lying, the bones of Ainsworth lying on a table in front of us, and it was just, there was nothing to be said. It was, it really was a very intense, I'll never forget it, spiritual experience, and that wasn't really what I was looking for.
We weren't just narrowly interested in the relics or the reliquary or even just the life of Ainsworth, the brief span of life of Ainsworth. We were interested in that long afterlife. And when you think about it, what that is we were interested in the way in which people had believed in, had faith in, thought about, imagined, used, trusted, made sense of this girl who died, as we now know, before she probably was 20 years old, hundreds of years before. So their relationship with her, like ours, was also not a relationship. There wasn't any continuity. The continuity wasn't with Ainsworth, because Ainsworth as an individual had been long lost, as it were. The continuity was with the faith, with the veneration, with the respect, with the understanding, with the affection for this girl. And that was what we were trying to document and record. But what was so interesting was that at the end of all that, where do you end up? You end up actually with the girl herself. You end up where you started, with the girl. That's what's so interesting about this.